Commonwealth's attorneys and I have concluded that the NCAA sanctions were overreaching and unlawful.
Someone's got to develop a product that you and I, as a consumer, are going to want to buy.
The country needs a comprehensive energy plan.
Welcome to WHVL's For the Record. I'm Andrew Kalista, and joining us in studio, we are talking the Pennsylvania coal industry. John Pippy, the CEO of the Pennsylvania Coal Alliance. John, thanks for being here.
Andrew, thanks for having me. Really happy to be here.
John, obviously the first question that I have for you is, you work in the coal industry,
right.
So obviously it's just a natural thing. You hate the environment is what we're supposedly told.
Well, that's what you're told by a lot of people. That's just not true. I'm actually an environmental engineer, and I've raised my family here, and it's interesting. The coal people who work in the coal mines are also people who coach the baseball teams. They're ones that hunt in the community. They love their community. So I'll be able to tell you a little more about that.
Should mention that John is a lieutenant colonel in the Pennsylvania National Guard. We thank you for your service. John, talking about the coal industry, it's pretty much the bread and butter of Pennsylvania economics. We're such a power generating state. The Clean Power Plan that the EPA has recently put out this past year that's not formally adopted, what could that possibly mean to Pennsylvania?
Well, according to the DEP, they did an analysis. If the Clean Power Plan that was proposed by EPA is enacted the way it was written a year ago, and we'll see the final regulation coming out this summer. If the final regulation looks like the initial offering, you're going to see over a 70% reduction in coal utilization here in Pennsylvania alone. You'd have reliabilities issue. You'd see a tremendous increase in the cost of energy. A lot of people don't realize, but you mentioned it, that coal is the #1 source of energy. Over 40% of our electricity comes from coal here in Pennsylvania. It's actually about 38 in the nation. So coal's a big part of it. We mine it, transport it, and burn it cleaner than we ever have. And I think that's the story that I'm trying to get out there and tell people.
Has Pennsylvania, being that we're in Western Pennsylvania, you're so close to West Virginia and Ohio, those are also coal-producing states. Some of those states have taken up action against the EPA's plan and the plan coming out of Washington. Do you know if there's any plan like that in Pennsylvania to try and limit how much that EPA could introduce into the state?
Well, right now, we just had a gubernatorial election, so we have a new governor. The previous administration, Corbett administration, DEP officials wrote letters and testified as part of the hearing process for the EPA's proposal. We have not heard yet from the new administration as to if they were going to look at potential legal challenges. In discussions with the Attorney General last year, there was a wait-and-see attitude to see how extensive the regulations will be. I do think, and there already are lawsuits that are in Washington in federal courts that are challenging the constitutionality, the overreach of EPA regulations. So yeah, I think there will be a lot of activity. Right now, my job is to help educate the people and try to direct public opinion in a way that shows the value of environmentally sustainable, low-cost energy.
Let's get into the plan a little bit. The EPA says they want to limit carbon emissions by 30% going off of the 2005 levels. We saw some of that plan implementation with the fuel economy in cars. That was part of it. But now they want to target power-producing plants because right now they have an unlimited amount of carbon that they could dump into the atmosphere. What are the plans that the power producers are putting in to maybe say, okay, you don't have to shut us down, we don't need to do this, but we could actually do this on our own if you help us out with it?
Well, I think you got a couple things. First, and the EPA is actually, if you use a 2005 number for Pennsylvania, it would require a 42% reduction. They're saying 30, but they're using a 2012 number. And that's one of the challenges here, is that that's getting caught in the discussion because we have seen a tremendous reduction in CO2 emissions in Pennsylvania. It will be almost 29% from 2005 to 2020. The challenge is, in order for us to achieve that 42% reduction the EPA wants, or 42% from 2005, we would have to, as DEP said, reduce our coal utilization by over 70%. Burning fossil fuel results in CO2 emissions. Depending on the type of coal, it varies as to the amount of fossil fuel. There's no way we can reach the targets EPA has given us if we still maintain a large coal portfolio. The companies burn it cleaner, But the CCS technology, carbon capture sequestration, that would be necessary to try to get to those levels isn't commercially available. So it's really a ban. That's our big argument right now, is that we're putting regulations ahead of available technology, and that's a new twist that we have never really seen before.
One of their goals, just looking at some of the numbers, 2,043 metric tons of CO2 emissions in 2013 were the numbers. Their actual goal is 933 metric tons. To me, that actually sounds like it's unreasonable. It's almost as if their renewable energy source of 25% goal for 2030, that seems unreasonable as well, because we constantly see renewables. We throw money at renewables like Solyndra, and yet they fail constantly.
Well, and that's I think part of the narrative that the EPA wants to project is that this is coal versus wind and solar, and the fossil fuel versus renewables. In Pennsylvania, we already passed a renewable portfolio standard that mandated using renewables as part of our dispatching. Even with that mandate, we're still only at 1.5%. People don't realize that. Even if we doubled it, it will be 3%. You mentioned Solyndra, hundreds of millions of dollars, tax dollars, went into something that was playing the market, and it didn't work. There will be a growth in renewable, but to argue that it will replace fossil fuel is just not correct. I mean, especially in the time frame they propose. 100 years, 150 years down the road with new technology, that's a different debate. But over the next 2 generations, the numbers don't add up, and that's why these EPA building blocks are starting to crumble under the weight of what I call reality.
John, you mentioned that coal is increasingly green. You see the billboards on the major interstates throughout the state. Off the top of your head, do you happen to know the numbers say how much CO2 emissions out of a normal ton of coal were when it was burned to what it is today?
Well, see, and that's part of the debate. They've shifted the narrative. When we talk about clean coal, we're talking about the particulates, the NOx, the SOx. And even in a new coal-fired power plant, you do see a CO2 reduction because the plant's more efficient, up to 10-20% of reduction in CO2 emissions from today versus one of the older plants. So we try to say that if you were to build a new coal-fired power plant today, and your average CO2 amount per megawatt hour is a couple thousand, like you mentioned earlier, you could potentially, depending on the technology, get it down to about 1,600, which would be a significant reduction. What the EPA wants you to get down to, though, is 11, and then at some points 900 pounds per megawatt hour. Well, you can't do that with the current fossil fuel technology, and that's really the frustration. We've seen over 90% reduction in particulates, in NOx and SOx, nitrous oxide, sulfuric oxide, what you would associate with the industrial age. That has been cleaned up through technology. You've seen an improvement in the CO2. We should continue on that path, not the strategy.
We'll get into that a little bit more. We're talking the Pennsylvania coal industry with John Pippy, the CEO of the Pennsylvania Coal Alliance. Back with more on For the Record right after this. Welcome back to For the Record. We are talking the Pennsylvania coal industry with the CEO of the Pennsylvania Coal Alliance, John Pippy. John, we left off talking about where the Clean Power Plan, what that would do to the coal industry in the state of Pennsylvania, but I want to get into the power generators. At least five plants have shut down recently. What could that mean to the power producing and the surplus of wattage that we have in this state?
Well, to put it in perspective, we've lost over 5,000 megawatts in Pennsylvania alone of coal-fired power generation. So that's enough power to power over 5 million homes. Last year, during what was people called the polar vortex, the cold weather in early January 2014, PJM, who manages our grid here for Pennsylvania and other states around us, we were within 1% of being over capacity, or of the capacity. Within 1%. Some would argue it was down to less than 500 megawatts. If one of those plants shut down, we could have potentially had a scenario where we would have rolling brownouts. In New England right now, their grid manager is saying that if they don't build new capacity by 2016, they may not have enough power. In Ohio, they are saying they may not have enough power in the next few years. So when we talk about grid reliability, we're not talking about the lines falling down. We're literally saying there won't be enough power generation to meet the needs of our country. And for a first world country, a model for the rest of the world, to have a rolling brownout because of capacity issues just doesn't make sense.
You bring up the rest of the world, just going off the other G8 members. Right. If every coal plant shut down in this country, you still have India, you still have China. That's where a lot of coal burning and fossil fuel burning is going on right now. So what would the global impact be if the U.S. cut the coal plants out 100%?
If we eliminated all coal-fired power generation in the United States, less than a 1% impact globally, it would be the equivalent of a couple weeks of power generation in those two nations that you just mentioned. People forget that too. Power generation is part of the man-made CO2, but you also have a majority of it coming from transportation, industrialization, and urbanization. So you can eliminate us, but you wouldn't have a appreciable, significant impact on the overall cost. But what you would have is literally, and these are hard numbers, hundreds of millions of jobs, hundreds of thousands of jobs, billions of dollars.
I'm just curious, we brought up Governor Wolf a little while ago. He has been non-committal so far. His spokesman has said that the state needs a flexible plan to try to introduce this. I'm wondering about Senator Casey, because Senator Casey back in June said that yes, the state needs to be able to handle it, but this is a goal that he believes in, and he believes in the plan.
Our concern has always been, it's the details that matter, especially to the working men and women who are in the industry that make these great paying jobs. If we have reasonable regulations that take into account current available technology, that take into account the dynamics we talked about happening around the world globally, then we could find, I think, a win-win scenario. But when you have people who say that we need to eliminate fossil fuel from our mix, they're unrealistic. So I think there was some positive from what Senator Casey has said, and hopefully through education and information, we can find a middle ground that lets us keep this great resource and power our economy.
Every political campaign focuses on jobs and the economy and things like that. If this plan went into effect as the draft was written, what does that mean for jobs in the state?
Well, it's a loss of tens of thousands of jobs in the industry and all the other jobs associated with it. Yeah, the firms, the engineering firms, the truck companies, the companies that provide the fuel, that will be tremendous. What people don't talk about is Pennsylvania, we're a diverse Commonwealth. Almost half of our people make less than $50,000 a year. They will see the low income and low middle income will be hit the hardest by these rules. That's the irony of this whole debate. In Washington, they say they're for the working man and women, but they're the ones that are going to be hit the hardest because they're the ones that are going to see an increase of 10, 15% in their energy cost. 20 years ago, your energy cost wasn't a main factor in your disposable income. Now it is, and that's a tragedy.
The U.S. government, they spend millions of dollars every year with oil credits for elderly people in the New England area and things like that, and for higher electric bills. If everybody had a coal stoker in their stove, it's about $250 a ton and possibly could get you through an entire winter if it's just a little bit over mild. Not a bad winter like last year, but if it's a little bit over mild. Isn't that good for the economy as a whole, putting more money back in people's pockets?
Yeah, I've always been very supportive when I was in politics of LIHEAP, low-income housing assistance, home energy assistance program. The challenge is, if we made energy less expensive, which meant utilizing all our natural resources in an environmentally friendly way, you wouldn't need to have as much money in those programs because people could afford it. Coal being one of it. Up in the anthracite region, you were telling me where you're from. That's a big player, and that's important. So I think our friends in Washington specifically are a little misguided because if there are wonderful, easy ways for us to provide low-cost energy, provide resources for those individuals, and maintain a sustainable environment.
John brought it up. I am from Schuylkill County, Pennsylvania. Everybody's goal is mine more coal where I'm from. John, if you took the millions of dollars that the government spent in those type of credits, or maybe the millions of dollars that they've given to renewable energies, and they dedicated some of that to the coal industry, to maybe get the technology that you brought up earlier, maybe it's a better scrubber, or maybe it's to limit the cost for the producers of the scrubber. Do you think the coal industry would go for that?
Yeah, I think, and the interesting thing is my industry isn't asking for those type, although you would always love to see increased investment in clean coal technologies. And in the past, previous administrations, Democrat and Republican at the federal level, have supported that, and that's where we've seen a lot of breakthroughs in this technology. Our biggest issue right now is we need to have a level playing field on the regulatory side. If you have regulations that are de facto bans. We mentioned you can't build a new coal-fired power plant on the proposed regulations because the CCS technology isn't currently available and won't be for at least 10 years. So you're banning new plants, and the existing plants you put a level that you talked about earlier. We just want a level playing field.
We're talking how to save the coal industry in the state of Pennsylvania. You are watching WHEL's For the Record. Back with more right after this. Welcome back to WHVL's For the Record, talking coal industry in the state of Pennsylvania with John Pippy, the CEO of the Pennsylvania Coal Alliance. And John, we left off talking about rate increases for the low and middle class. I'm just curious, the power producing companies in the state of Pennsylvania, such as PPL, Old Dominion, which ships a lot of power to the state, West Penn Energy, PECO, have they commented on this? Because sources inside of PPL a couple years ago, when they went for their rate hike and people got all up in arms about it, the fact was if PPL didn't get the rate hike, they were out of business.
Right. Well, I think across the board, each of those companies is a little different in their mix on their energy portfolio. But the bottom line is, if for them, they want to get the lowest cost source of energy as possible to create that electricity. And if you take away the lowest cost, one of the lowest costs, which is coal, then obviously the rates are going to go up. And we saw that last year during the polar vortex. I mentioned earlier the capacity, they were within 1% of shutting or running into rolling brownouts. The price of energy is usually $30 to $50 a megawatt hour. It skyrocketed to, at some places, up to $1,800. Not a double, triple, 100 times, well, almost 100 times. So it's a big number, and that's what people get worried about.
Currently, 11% of the U.S. power comes from renewables. Right. By 2030, under the Clean Power Plan, they want to get that to 25%.
Right.
Can a capitalist market even support that at this point in time?
An economist would be one to best answer that question. What I will tell you is that while I do think there's a role for it to grow, I think they've been overly optimistic. Here in Pennsylvania, I mentioned earlier, we're less than 5%. We already passed a law a few years ago to increase our renewables, but there's siting issues, wind, solar, intermittent sources of energy. There's a whole bunch of issues associated with locating these where politicians just can't write a law and expect the market to meet their expectations. So I think it's optimistic. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't try. You just shouldn't make all your policy based on an overly optimistic expectation.
It's an environmentally driven issue, and in Pennsylvania, fracking has always been an issue. Right now, about 22% of PA's power comes from natural gas. Right. With it being an environmentally driven issue, it seems no matter what source of energy people sprout out there, whether it's coal, natural gas, nuclear, which has very little byproduct, right, it seems the environmentalists are always unhappy. Where at some point is their middle ground? Because we've seen companies willing to say, okay, we could do this, we could do that, but now the government's the EPA is forcing this plan down their throats, so to speak. But where is the middle ground that maybe you could get the environmentalists to say, okay, here's what we could agree on?
That's the challenge, is we haven't been able to find that or see that. Many environmental organizations would say that their middle ground is switching from coal to natural gas. But then members of those same organizations are against building new gas power plants or building new gas pipelines. So there's a disconnect between the political comments and what you're seeing actually occurring on the ground. I think, for me, the middle ground is based on the regulation of the currently available technology, understanding the marketplace and not trying to skew the marketplace at such a level that the cost of electricity will go up 10, 20%. So the middle ground somewhere in there. And we've usually been able to do that in this country through a process called legislation at the federal and state level. This administration, or the EPA specifically, has not. They've been mandating and doing it through a bureaucratic process. And I think that's why you see the arguments becoming a lot more frankly, political in nature, which is sad.
Bringing up the legislative process, a Harvard environmental law professor who loves the environment recently wrote in the Wall Street Journal that the Clean Power Plan is unconstitutional. Do you guys believe that? Well,
the belief is, and I think there's a very strong evidence that the EPA overstepped its authority under the current their regulatory authority. And so that's where the constitutionality, they're going into what was traditionally the purview of the legislature. I completely agree with that statement. And the funny thing is, objective, scientific-based individuals are saying that, yet that's not the narrative you're hearing from the EPA and the administration.
He also pointed out that wave technology is a great source of power if we could get something to actually sustain the brunt of the ocean pounding, because waves go 24/7, 365, unlike wind and the sun. Where is the inventions coming from to get these renewables to their goal?
Well, I think there is a lot of federal money being invested in that, which is the right thing. We've done that with oil. We've done that with clean coal technology. There's no argument there. Our argument is when you try to mandate it through policy. The wave technology you're talking about too, there's a lot of excitement about that up in the European, Northern European areas and the coastal regions. There are some opportunities. There's not to say that that's wrong or that that's bad. It's not good versus bad. It's just that that's applicable in certain areas, and when it's commercially available, that even makes more sense. But we're not there yet, so we shouldn't base policy on that.
John, with how important of a topic this is for the state of Pennsylvania, where could people go to find more about coal? And if they wanted to contact their representative or their state senator, no matter what side of the argument they're on, of get rid of coal 100% or we want more coal?
Well, we have a website called betterwithcoal.com, and our argument is that life is better with reliable energy, so it's betterwithcoal.com, and on there you can find a lot of information about what we've been discussing, and if you email us, we can also, based on your zip code, tell you who your legislators are and give you the information so you can contact them, and that will keep you in the loop. And you said it well, this isn't about our side only, it's about hearing all sides and coming up with some reasonable regulatory environment that takes into account everything, the environment, energy, jobs, our global position as it relates to other nations.
John, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you coming up. John, he's a veteran. Thank him for his service, people. We appreciate him for coming and talking about such an important topic. And John, just real quick, 10 seconds, the future of coal. How quick can they adjust?
We're very flexible. I think that we can, we have a fair environment. Pennsylvania will do well. So we could do almost on a turn of a hat.
Remember, knowledge is power, everyone. Thank you for watching this edition of For the Record, and we'll see you again next week.